We've mentioned that there are three types of eukaryotic microbes. So there's protist microbes, fungal microbes, and algal microbes. I'm only going to introduce protists and fungi, or discuss protists and fungi, since they are of medical significance to humans. I'll also mention that it all depends on what your definition of microbe is. So if your definition of microbe is a single-celled organism, this is going to be your list of eukaryotic microbes. But if you're counting anything that you need to look at under a microscope, there could also be some animal microbes as well, because there are some animals that are too small to see with the naked eye, like tardigrades or water bears, for example, and certain kinds of parasitic worms. But we're just going to focus on the single-celled microbes here. So in this list, so I have protist, fungi, algae. So those are the three groups of eukaryotic microbes, but these groups are not representative of genetic lineages. Remember, protist is a grab bag term, and not all protists are alike, except that they are usually single cellular, but they're not even always single cellular. So I'm just going to bring back this tree, this phylogenetic tree from the first week, and you can see that protists are represented in every single eukaryotic kingdom. Okay. And I'll also point out that algae is not even a single group, right? So the term algae, the term protist, these don't represent actual, groups of organisms that are genetically related. So protists can be heterotrophs, meaning animal-like, they eat other organisms, or they can be autotrophs, meaning that they are able to make their own sugars out of using the energy from sunlight. So heterotrophs are organisms that survive by eating other organisms. So we are heterotrophs. We survive by eating other plants or other animals. Autotrophs do not need other organisms to survive. They get their energy from other sources like the sun. So there's examples of both styles of protist. Any kind of pathogen is going to be a heterotroph. Okay, so pathogens invade your body because they are basically eating you. They're using your body for energy. There's no need for an autotroph to cause disease because they are quite self-sufficient, just using sunlight, for example. But there are some important heterotrophic protist diseases. So malaria is a protist, not a bacteria. Giardia is caused by a protist. And then the microbe that causes sleeping sickness is a protist, not a bacteria. So that's trypanosoma. So those are just three of a number of examples. There's more examples than that, but there are a number of human diseases that are protist. And you need to know if the disease is protist or not, because a drug that you use to kill a bacteria is not going to have any effect on a protist, because they have, as we just discussed in the last lecture video, they have a lot of anatomical differences and physiological differences. So you'd use different drugs to treat them. The other thing about protists is, like we looked at in this phylogenetic tree, protists can be fairly different from each other. So a drug that kills one kind of protist might not be effective at all at killing a different protist. Protists use three types of locomotion. Flagella are more complex than the flagella of prokaryotes. So we talked about how the flagella for prokaryotes is rigid, and it has a wavy structure, but that wave doesn't move. It's frozen. It's completely rigid, and then that flagellar tail just rotates. For eukaryotes, it actually undulates. It's an extension of the cytoplasm. It's filled with cytoskeletal elements that are flexible, and it can actually undulate. So that helps the protist swim through liquid. Cilia are little hairs that move like oars to propel a protist through liquid. So those are also for swimming. And then pseudopodia. So pseudo means false, podia refers to feet. So pseudopodia literally means false foot, or false feet. A cell that uses pseudopodia for locomotion is going to extend out part of its cell membrane and then grip a solid surface. So that extension of the cell membrane, here you can see this here. So this cell has reached out a false foot. It's extended out a piece of the cell membrane, just gripped onto the solid surface, and is dragging the rest of itself behind. We sometimes call this amoeboid-like movement. So once it adheres to the solid surface, it's going to pull the rest of the cell behind it, and then it's going to reach out again, grip a solid surface, and then pull again the rest of the cell behind it. So those are the three styles of locomotion you'll find in protists. Fungi, like animals, are entirely heterotrophic. As we discussed in week 1, they are very much like animals in many ways. We belong to the same kingdom. But their sex lives can be very complicated. While some of the more primitive fungi appear to be entirely asexual, reproducing only clonally, other species have 2 sexes, like us, and yet others have many, many more sexes. So this innocent-looking fungus down here has well over 10,000 sexes. So what does this even mean? Well, as you know from our simple 2-sex system, to have a baby, you have to mate with someone of the opposite sex. So this means in a 2-sex system, you could have a baby, if you walked into a bar, you could potentially have a baby with about 50% of the people in the bar. Now, whether you would actually want to is a different story, but technically speaking, you could. But in a 10,000 sex system, if all you need to do is find an individual who's a different sex than you are to have offspring, you could potentially have a baby with 99.999% of the other individuals that you encountered in the bar. And that really improves the odds of having offspring and finding a suitable mate. So again, I'm going to remind you that the close genetic relationship between humans and fungi has medical significance. In the case of fungal infection, it can be difficult to find biochemical or anatomical features on a fungus to target with a poison that will not also poison the human host.